Welcome to Chapter 18. We're going to begin by taking a look at the early story as told in the introduction, right here, of the industrialization section of your textbook. Your book here first portrays a painting of a potential labor union riot, and one of the things that I wanted to point out here um, is all of the different inferences that can be made through just the look at one picture. You see here first a large crowd gathering. You see a union leader or a personal leader here, but notice the background of an industrial city with kind of a sloping interior next to a big brick building, possibly a bank, and over here potentially a factory. But there are no roads, there are no trees, there is no blue sky. In fact, it has a very earth tone dreariness to it. And you see here a mother and her children kind of watching earnestly to see what happens, and another young woman here trying to plead or make a point with an industrial worker who represent all different aspects of life in urban cities in the 19th century. Over here, you have a banker up on the steps in a raised position, almost demonstrating their social status. And over here, down to the bottom right, you see maybe an immigrant or a worker almost picking up a rock as if things are going to get violent. But notice the diversity of the crowd, specifically those who are working together and talking together of different ages and different sorts. And this is this is an indication of some of the rapid changes socially that were produced by vast economic and technological changes in the late 19th century. And all of this produces a massive, disproportionate portrayal of wealth and class in American society. And that's something that we'll continue to take a look at, is that that division between the classes that comes because of the economic policies here. Now, on a more local note, you'll notice that the story here that focuses on good old Thomas O'Donnell is the story of a person from Fall River, Massachusetts. And the portrayal that he has here of the cost of living that he demonstrates to a Senate committee on working conditions and the relations between labor and capital. In this case, labor refers to the the workers themselves and the wages that they receive for the work that they do in an industrialized economy. Capital refers to specifically the amount of investment and wealth that's used to help spur economic growth as well as consolidate it in the hands of a relatively small number of people who promote a great deal of economic change. And your book goes on to point out that the disparity between these two as they were trying to communicate, Senators and O'Donnell, on these changes. So let's get straight to the beginning of the chapter, which is your first reading, and that focuses on industrial progress. Now, there are a couple main points that your chapter begins with. One is that in 1861 we see that agriculture was the country's leading source of economic growth, but that quickly shifts to manufacturing and then later financial investment. We'll see how that goes. We know that this is a period of three great changes in American society. One is industrial, the second is focused on immigration, and the third great change going on in the late 19th century is urbanization. And all of these changes, industrialization, urbanization, and immigration, are all interconnected and interdependent on one another. And it seems like this has been a time of pretty good growth. The growth of manufactured goods um, is produces by 1900 3 times as many goods as per person as existed in 1890. But per capita income also increases, which is the average amount of money an individual is making in the country, by 2% a year during this period of 4 decades. Now, that seems like by the end of the 19th century that people would be making a great deal more money. However, that money and those wages are not equally distributed. So, there are a couple of characteristics that your text introduces first. Okay, and one is how big business came to help and shape the economic organization of the country. They were able to finance large factories. Um, they were able to pay for expensive machinery, hire hundreds, if not thousands, of workers, and support technological innovation. Now, this was all good, but it creates an essential question that we're going to look at here, and that is that industrialization did increase the standard of living and opportunities of most Americans, but at what cost? And as your book begins to explore, so we will also explore the causes of rapid industrialization. Well, the first major cause that we know of is the early period of industrialization, with the introduction of the steam engine, as well as the use of steam power on steamboats, and also rudimentary manufacturing equipment from the 1830s to the 1850s. That revolutionizes or transforms manufacturing because it provides a power source. The power source is steam itself, and that power source is derived from the burning of coal, which generally supplies the energy resources for this economic and industrial growth. Well, we see later, by the 1850s, that railroads are having an enormous transformational influence on American business. First, they are one of the first large national businesses across the United States. They also encourage a lot of financial investments, and because of the profitability of many railroads and the necessity of them in order to transport goods and settle the West, as well as bring many resources to urban areas, it was a great investment. And so many foreign nations found that investing in American railroads was sound economic policy. Railroads also helped open up the West, that much is obvious, and it did help with the development of other industries. And specifically, we can think of the lumber industry, the cattle industry, the mining industries, as well as the development of large-scale farming or cash crop farming in the Great Plains area. So there are also some other causes here of rapid industrialization, and your book goes on to talk about these changes specifically with the inventions of Thomas Edison, which we'll come to in a second. But one of the most important that your text points out, and points out very clearly here, is Andrew Carnegie and the development of something known as the Bessemer process. Okay, the Bessemer process was a way of helping to transform from iron steel. And steel was lighter and stronger than iron. And as Andrew Carnegie consolidated all of the means for producing steel in one manufacturing company, he was able to create more of it and for a cheaper price, which we see here as the price plummets from $100 a ton to $12 a ton by 1890. There are also, in your book, they give you an infographic here on how steel is actually produced, but it raises some interesting questions. The, um, the relationship between production and prices, for instance, is a very interesting question in that as production rises, prices generally fall. But if you remember when we were talking about the relationship between supply and demand, um, these answers are a little bit more obvious than some might think. Um, we see here also some very basic facts through the infographic. One is that the price of steel does go down in dollars per gross ton. We see that many steel producing factories are in the Northeast. That's because of um, much of the immigration during that period, also focusing on cheap labor in that area, as well as the building of factories on rivers and the easy access that many factories had to railroads, especially in the northeast sector. And if we see here in the chart that the Bessemer process increases the amount of steel that's produced in thousands of gross tons, and we see here that the number of wage earners increases, the amount of investment in steel production grows up enormously, and the amounts of production increases as well. And so that has, a lot of different effects on the economy, which we will talk about. So first, we mentioned the Bessemer process as being important. The next is Thomas Edison, who is responsible predominantly for the development of the electric light bulb, in which he was able to succeed only after hundreds of failed attempts, the phonograph, and the motion pictures. So let's take a look at Thomas Edison here, who also industrialized the invention process by creating a factory of inventors and using their resources to the best of his ability by fostering innovation. We see here the early production of the light bulb being recognized in some postage stamps. The phonograph was, of course, the very first attempt and time that human voice was recorded and able to be played back. And Thomas Edison also created a way of recording the voice. Um, this is the very first way of doing what I'm doing right now, which is recording my voice on a computer in order to convey information 100 years from, or more than 100 years from Edison's dictaphone. He invented the moving picture camera in order to create movies. Alexander Graham Bell, very famously in 1876, helped create the telephone using his experience with work on helping the deaf to create an invention that would transmit voice over um, electric wire. We see here that as Thomas Edison demonstrated and Alexander Graham Bell continued, that the use of electricity as a power source rather than steam power greatly influenced the development of other inventions as well, but it was very important to figure out how to get electricity to regulate itself through vast distances, and that was accomplished by George Westinghouse, who created the alternating current, which would produce electric signals that would not degrade over great distances. We see here some advertisements for some of his lamps later on. We know early in this moves on a little bit later than your textbook section, the development of the airplane by Orville and Wilbur Wright in 1903, the Model T automobile, which helped perfect the assembly line process, which helped plummet the prices of automobiles while its production soared. We see here also that because of business policies and government practices, the number of U.S. patents greatly increased during the period of the 1790s up into the 1800s. And then finally we come to the last of these sections, the causes of industrialization. Because of immigration, there was a large unskilled labor force. There was a lot of foreign investment from England and the rest of Europe. A new group of entrepreneurs and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section.